Hello and welcome to the last webinar in the Ultimate Free Webinar Series by Wholistic Hounds. My name is Morgan Fitzgerald, and I'm a holistic dog groomer and animal Reiki practitioner, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and currently located in Central Oregon. Today we're going to be talking about evolving the industry, why I became a holistic groomer. So let's get started. So to start off, we'll talk a little bit of background about me. So here's a photo of me at 2 years old with our pet snake Buzz. I grew up with a conventional nurse as my mom, and my grandma was also a nurse. I grew up with a lot of domesticated animals in childhood. So, like you can see in this photo, we had a snake. We also had cats, rabbits. At one point, we had ducks, an iguana. And so I had a lot of experience at a very young age helping to care for and handling animals of all sorts, including exotic animals. So I had some personal experiences in the medical industry that kind of alerted me that something wasn't right. So when I was 16 years old, I had some stomach problems where I was experiencing some pretty excruciating stomach pain that was making it hard for me to go to school. And it was really negatively impacting my performance in school. I went to get help from the medical system, and the issues were undiagnosed. So later in my life, I learned that these stomach problems that I was experiencing were a direct result from a series of HPV vaccines that I received when I was 16. So I was experiencing some side effects, but that went undiagnosed and unrecognized. And so I had some trouble with continuing my education because of how much pain I was in. And then that eventually led to some depression. And so when I was 18 years old, I was treated without informed consent in the human medical field for mental health issues. So, informed consent is when the practitioners that are taking care of you, they kind of disclose the treatments that you'll be receiving and what some of those side effects were. So, when I was treated, I did not have informed consent and I was given drugs against my will. And so I'm not going to go too in depth about the details of my personal experiences in this webinar, but I will talk more on this later on because it is a big factor of why I became a holistic practitioner with animals. And so all of these personal experiences um, led me to know that something just wasn't right with the human medical field. And because I had a conventional nurse as my mom, and my grandma was also a conventional nurse, I never really had any reason to not trust the medical field. In fact, anything that my mom told me in regards to my health, I believed. So, my personal experiences are what led me to realize that even the human medical field, that something just wasn't right. Okay, so now let's talk about my experience in the pet care industry. And so all of my personal experiences in the pet care industry are what led me to become a holistic groomer and a holistic pet care professional. So again, just for the scope of time today, I'm not going to go into too in depth about this stuff because I will be speaking on this later on. But I'm just going to kind of give you a synopsis of my experience. So my first job in the pet care industry was a grooming salon. And now, ever since I was little, I always wanted to work with animals. I had a special affinity and connection with them from the time I was very young, as you could see in the photo of me holding the snake at 2 years old. So I always wanted to work with animals, and my first job came to me in the animal care world, and it was in a grooming salon. So, and it was a conventional high volume grooming salon, and I was hired in as a dog bather. And I noticed red flags pretty much immediately. So I noticed that the dogs were never given water or bathroom breaks, even though some of them would be there 4 hours or more. And there was a low quality of care. The dogs were treated mainly as products and not as sentient beings. And there was a large separation between staff. So the staff also had no background in behavior. My training did not consist of anything having to do with body language behavior. calming cues or anything like that. So the dogs were routinely pushed over their threshold to complete grooming tasks. And so the separation between the staff that I'm referring to was between the bathers and the groomers. So the bathers worked in the back and they were responsible for getting the dogs clean and dry. And then the groomers worked in the front and they would do the styling portion of the grooming. And so a lot of times at the salon that I worked at, the groomers up front would refuse to even bathe a dog. And then they would complain to the bathers when they weren't totally dry. And a lot of times the dogs wouldn't be totally dry because they would be having a panic attack, or they would be scratching us, or they would be freaking out at the dryer. And so there was a lot of separation between the groomers and the bathers. The bathers were the ones receiving the dogs when they were caked in urine and feces, but we didn't receive tips at all, and only the groomers up front did. So at this particular facility, there was a lot of separation. Um, and just something quick for me to share with you about when I worked at that grooming salon. There was a dog that was in the back crying because the dog was ready to go home and was probably over their threshold. It was a small dog who had a high-pitched bark, and the dog was crying. And my coworkers said to me, and it was intended to be a joke, and they said, "Morgan, can you go kill that dog for us?" And again, it was intended to be a joke, but I didn't think it was funny. This was my first job in the pet care industry, and I was kind of repulsed by the fact that the dogs were being treated that way and that someone would even say that to me as a joke. So, needless to say, I did not work in that grooming salon very long, although I did learn a lot. I was fortunate enough to be trained by someone who was a lot more empathetic towards the dogs than some of the other people that I worked with. So that was my first job in the pet care industry. And I realized that maybe grooming wasn't for me because it was all about looks. It wasn't about the dog's well being at all. And so I went on to work in dog daycares and boarding facilities after that. So, again, just for the scope of time, I'm not going to go too in depth about this. I worked in dog daycares and boarding facilities for several years before I went on to start my own business. And the dog daycare that I worked in initially, after about a month, I became the manager. So I was responsible for managing large groups of dogs. I was responsible for administering medications, giving dinner and breakfast, delegating tasks, checking dogs in and out of daycare, inputting vet records, all those sorts of things. And so my first day there, I was put into a group of over 20 dogs by myself. And the tool that we were given to manage the dog group was a water spray bottle. So we were expected to correct the dogs using the water spray bottle. So again, I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly so that we can get everything covered today. But there was a very low quality of care. Not even water was fresh. There was a death of a dog in a kennel that I worked for. So the dog was attacked by another dog during playgroup, and she sustained extremely bad injury to her ear where it was pretty much torn off. The first thing I said was, this dog needs to see a vet. But the owner of the facility I worked for and the dog's guardian refused veterinary care. That dog then died in the kennel overnight, and I was the fortunate soul who found her in the morning. So that was very traumatizing. That was the first big thing that happened that alerted me that these pet care facilities weren't always putting the animal's best interests at heart, and they were kind of placing reputation and profit above all of that. So, and then after the dog dying, the owner of the facility I worked for just lied about dog's health problems. So there was a puppy that was eating poop, and he ended up getting extremely sick. The lady that I worked for refused to tell the dog's guardian that he was eating poop and refused to do anything to manage it while he was in our care. So he ended up being rushed to the emergency vet and was diagnosed with gastroenteritis, which is an inflammation of the intestinal tract. So he was very sick. He was vomiting, he had diarrhea, and the lady that I worked for refused to tell the owner what was going on. So she had no idea why her dog was sick. And that didn't resonate with me because as a manager, I was kind of expected to go along with the lies. But that just didn't resonate with me. And I really believed that when it came to an animal's health, that you need to tell the truth. And so after that, I just eventually I left that job and I went on to work in other dog daycares and boarding facilities. Um, and the other thing that I saw that was like just the last thing that I could handle when I decided to just leave this type of work and start my own business was I worked at another dog daycare. And this dog daycare had the most amount of dogs of any dog daycare that I worked at. So sometimes we would have 100 daycare dogs. And that was only daycare dogs. So it was also a boarding facility. So just for daycare, we would have 100 dogs, and that was split into two groups. So I noticed in this facility that people were aversively correcting the dogs worse than any other place I'd ever worked. And there was one day where there was multiple times where I saw people actually actively hitting the dogs. And I had never seen this. I mean, I'd seen people yell, I'd seen people grab collars, but I had never seen someone just hit a dog like that. And so obviously I brought it up to the owner of the facility. The owner of the facility pretty much threatened me and threatened my job, threatened my life, my livelihood. So I realized that just because someone owned an animal care facility did not mean that they should, and did not mean that they were giving a high quality of care to these animals. So I mentioned the neglect and the abuse, dogs being left in kennels for hours on end, in their own urine and feces. That was a very common occurrence. Dogs being in kennels for 4 hours or more, where their parents think they're playing or whatever. Inappropriate dog to staff ratio. I think the most dogs I ever had in a group by myself was probably 50 or over 50 dogs, and just me. So inappropriate dog to staff ratio was a big issue. It was a very stressful job. There was always dog fights nearly every single day. And then I just started noticing the behavior and health problems that were really common. And I started to look more into holistic health care for animals. And I started to see the drawbacks of over vaccinating, the drawbacks of the aversive corrections with the spray bottles and things like that. So all of these experiences led me to start my own business and to do it in a holistic way. So I also worked in rescues and shelters, and I did private pet sitting for a period of time before I started my business. So I'm just going to kind of go through the rest of these slides quickly. Um, and again, I will be speaking more on my experiences in the pet care industry later, so I can talk about the truth about dog daycares and that sort of thing for people that might be curious. So the pet care industry as a whole is unregulated. This means that there is not a standard curriculum or education, and that anyone can call themselves a dog trainer, a groomer, a dog daycare owner, etc. And it's not just grooming and training industries that need revised. The entire veterinary community also needs a new standard of care to include holistic, integrative, and alternative options. So here are some of the things that I would propose to create a new standard of care and to help to evolve the industry. The pet care industry needs to evolve, and that's just it's just obvious. We can evolve the industry by setting a new standard of care because animals and people do deserve a higher quality of care. So the first thing would be to ban and outlaw all aversive training tools. The industry can set a new standard of care by banning all aversive training tools such as shock collars, prong collars, choke chains, etc. The second thing is to upgrade the curriculum. Teach every single animal care worker behavior, positive reinforcement dog training, nutrition, and Reiki or energy healing. The third thing that I would propose to set a new standard of care would be to create an independent agency that does routine checks on all animal care facilities. And so this independent agency could make sure that the animals were being cared for in a quality way, meaning they always have access to fresh water. They always are able to go outside to use the bathroom. They always have a clean kennel. Because surprisingly enough, those were some of the things that I noticed were very common. Dogs not having water, dogs laying on a bed that was covered in urine or feces. And that should never be occurring. So, and this independent agency could make sure the staff to dog ratio is appropriate and those sorts of things. And the last thing that I would propose to create a new standard of care would be to completely change the veterinary school curriculum to include nutrition, behavior, and alternative therapies. Because from my experience, even conventional veterinarians are pretty in the dark about overall health for animals. So changing the curriculum could definitely help because it's not their fault that they were indoctrinated into a corrupt system. So we have just 5 minutes left. So I'm going to try to kind of zoom through these. What would it look like if the industry was regulated? So I kind of just, in this slide, I went into the future and what does it look like when the industry is regulated? So aversive and balanced trainers are a thing of the past. All groomers become holistic and learn to consider dog behavior, body language, grooming threshold, and the use of non-toxic products. In my experience, a lot of people that claim to be holistic groomers are still using non-toxic grooming products and unhealthy high-value treats. So that's definitely something that we need to all be on par with so that everyone knows to use non-toxic products and to honor the dog's grooming threshold. So for animal care facilities and veterinary clinics, the standard of care is no longer drugs and surgery, but instead we offer less invasive, non-toxic options first. We become very judicial about the use of antibiotics, vaccines, and pharmaceutical medications. And in this situation, the cost of vet care will decrease because a lot of times holistic and alternative options can be more cost effective than drugs and surgery. Empower the people with holistic health. That's part of evolving the industry, becoming more knowledgeable about nutrition, the significance of the gut microbiome, the corruption of the pet food industry, food grade ingredients versus feed grade. And these are all things that we can go more in depth later on. Empower the people with energy healing because largely we ignore spiritual health. And disease happens on a subtle level before it ever makes it to a physical level. So, learning things like Reiki and energy healing and alternative therapies. Conventional treatments not only cost more, but there may be better options with less side effects. So, looking into things like herbalism, homeopathy, chiropractic, laser therapy, hydrotherapy. There's so many different options that we have that we can all start to learn more about. And so this is really a call to action. What can you do at home to help evolve the industry and create a new standard of care? So advocating for your pet in all situations, adding a holistic or homeopathic veterinarian to your list of professionals, know the drawbacks of conventional care, know the drawbacks of over vaccinating, know the drawbacks of conventional flea, tick, and heartworm medications, know the drawbacks of feeding commercial pet food such as kibble. We can empower ourselves with the knowledge, and that's one way that we can do that. And ask all the right questions when choosing a pet care professional. So, when I'm talking about advocating for your pet in all situations, that means in veterinary situations as well. So, if the veterinary staff are handling your animal in a way that you think is inappropriate or is causing stress, then speak up. You can always halt the veterinary visit and you can always go somewhere else. The power is truly in our hands, and we have the knowledge and the sources available to us to evolve the industry and to create a new standard of care. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I know I sped through the rest of this, but we will have a chance later on to talk more about my experiences in the pet care industry. If you have a question specifically about dog daycares or any of the other facilities I've worked in, feel free to reach out. And otherwise, you can contact me at my website, which is holistichounds.dog, and that's holistic with a W. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you at our next event. Thanks so much.